What you are about to hear is the testimony of David Lev, a young Israeli believer who learned that following Jesus sometimes means walking straight into fire, literally. After losing his family and his engineering career when he converted to Christianity, David thought he understood the cost of discipleship. But then God asked him to do the unthinkable, cross into Saudi Arabia and shepherd a secret church where the gospel is forbidden by law. For months, David lived in the shadows, teaching believers who risk their lives just to worship. Then one night, everything collapsed. Religious vigilantes burst into their hidden meeting place, and David found himself kneeling on a concrete floor, soaked in gasoline, waiting to burn. What happened next cannot be explained by human logic, only by the power of a God who shows up in impossible moments. This story will challenge your faith, break your heart, and remind you why the name of Jesus still changes everything. If you already moved, subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss stories like this. Leave a like to help us reach more people, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far God's word travels. Now, let's begin.
I never thought my life would end in flames. Growing up in Ashkelon, Israel, I understood conflict. It was part of the air we breathed. But miracles? No. My family was modern, educated, allergic to anything remotely supernatural. Faith wasn't something we discussed, it was something we dismissed. When I encountered Jesus at 21 through a traveling street evangelist in Tel Aviv, my parents said I had lost my mind. When I walked away from my engineering position to study theology and become a pastor, they said I had thrown away my future. But none of us, not them, not me, had any idea what God was preparing me for. The biggest shock of my life wasn't losing my family or sleeping on friends' couches while I figured out ministry. It wasn't even the isolation of being an Israeli believer in a culture that saw my faith as betrayal. No. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I would experience on a Friday night in an abandoned paint workshop in Al Ramel, Saudi Arabia. Even now, years later, when I close my eyes, I can still smell it. The sharp chemical sting of gasoline. The acrid smoke. The roar of flames surrounding me like a living wall. But here's what sounds impossible: the fire never touched me. And what happened after that moment, what happened to the men who came to kill me, I still struggle to put into words. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened, because even today, I find myself asking, why me? Why that way? Why did God choose fire to prove His presence? That night began like so many others, or at least, what we had learned to call normal while living in secret. It was a Friday, just after midnight. We were gathered in our usual place, an old paint workshop on the outskirts of Al Ramel, a forgotten industrial town deep in Saudi territory. The building was lifeless during the day: concrete floors, rusted metal shelves, the smell of chemicals permanently baked into the walls. But at night, it became our sanctuary. The windows were covered with cardboard we'd carefully taped over every crack. We kept the lights low, just a single battery-powered lantern in the center, and we spoke in whispers, even when we prayed. There were 12 of us that night. Danisha, the Sri Lankan expatriate who had first contacted me and organized the group, sat to my left, her worn Bible open on her lap. Rafiq, one of the 2 Saudi nationals in our congregation, sat across from me, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from living in constant fear. There were Filipino workers, an Eritrean woman, a Sudanese man, all of us bound together by something more dangerous than any of us could afford: faith in Jesus Christ. We were studying Acts 4. The chapter where the apostles prayed for boldness under persecution. It felt fitting. It felt dangerous. We had just reached verse 29, "Now, Lord, consider their threats and enable your servants to speak your word with great boldness," when I heard something outside. Not footsteps. Not a passing vehicle. No, it was a clicking sound. Sharp. Metallic. Repeated. Camera shutters. Someone was photographing the building. My stomach dropped. I lifted my hand to signal silence, but before I could speak, the workshop door exploded inward with a deafening crash. 4 men stormed inside, civilian clothing, but their faces were hard, their eyes burning with the kind of zeal that doesn't negotiate. One grabbed Danisha by the collar and yanked her backward. Another kicked our lantern across the floor, plunging us into near-total darkness except for thin slivers of moonlight cutting through the cardboard-covered windows. One man rushed straight toward me, shouting in Arabic, "You are the foreign preacher. The corrupter." Another held a metal fuel canister. The third carried a thick electric cable. My hands went up instinctively, trying to calm the situation, but 2 of them grabbed my arms and dragged me into the center of the room. My friends cried out, some praying in panicked whispers, some trembling, others frozen in sheer terror. The leader spat on the floor and pointed directly at me. "You preach forbidden lies," he said coldly. "Tonight, you burn." Then I felt it, the cold splash. Sharp. Shocking. Soaking through my shirt, my hair, running down my back. The smell hit me next, gasoline. My body went numb. Behind me, Rafiq's voice broke through the chaos, "Don't touch him. He's done nothing wrong." A fist silenced him with a brutal crack to the ribs. He collapsed with a groan. Someone kicked my legs out from under me. I fell hard onto my knees, gasoline dripping from my chin onto the concrete floor. In my mind, only one thought surfaced. Is this really how it ends? I expected terror to rise up, to claw its way through my chest and choke me. Instead, nothing. Only a quiet, steady voice in my spirit, calm as still water. "Do not fear the fire. I am here." The leader pulled a matchbook from his pocket. He struck one. It fled orange in the darkness. And then he dropped it. But to understand how a secular Israeli kid from Ashkelon ended up kneeling in a Saudi workshop, soaked in gasoline and waiting to burn, you need to know how I got there. You need to know who I was before Jesus found me, and what it cost me to follow him into the most forbidden place on earth. I was 21 years old, 3 years into an engineering degree at Tel Aviv University, and convinced I had my entire life mapped out. Graduate. Land a position with a tech firm. Make my parents proud. Build something stable in a country where stability was always fragile. That was the plan. Clean. Logical. Safe. Then I met him. I don't even remember his name. Just his face, weathered, kind, standing on a corner near Dizengoff Street with a small wooden table and a stack of pamphlets. Most people walked past without looking. I almost did too. But something stopped me. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was something I didn't have a name for yet. He asked me one question, "Do you know that God knows your name?" I laughed. Told him I didn't believe in that stuff. My family didn't do religion, at least not the kind that mattered. We observed holidays out of tradition, not conviction. God was distant, cultural, irrelevant. But he didn't argue. He just smiled and said, "He's been calling it anyway." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep in my chest. I couldn't shake it. For days, it followed me, into lectures, through my commute, into the silence of my apartment at night. He's been calling it anyway. I went back the next week. Then the week after that. The evangelist gave me a small New Testament. I read it in secret, like it was contraband. And somewhere in those pages, between the Sermon on the Mount and the Passion narratives, I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't dramatic. No visions. No audible voice. Just an overwhelming, undeniable sense that I was known, seen, loved, and that the life I had been building, as sensible as it was, would never be enough. When I told my parents I had become a follower of Jesus, my mother cried. Not tears of sadness, tears of anger. My father didn't speak to me for 3 days. When he finally did, his words were sharp and final: "You've lost your mind." When I told them months later that I was leaving my engineering program to study theology, the anger turned to something worse, disappointment so thick I could taste it. "You're throwing away your future," my father said, his voice cold. "For what? A foreign religion? A carpenter from Nazareth?" I tried to explain. Tried to tell them that I had found something worth more than security, more than success. That this wasn't about losing my future, it was about finding it. But they didn't understand. How could they? To them, I had traded everything solid for something invisible. The cost became real quickly. I moved out. Started sleeping on friends' couches while I figured out how to afford rent and tuition at a small Bible school on the outskirts of the city. My younger sister stopped answering my calls. Family gatherings happened without me. But something strange happened in the midst of the loss. I felt more alive than I ever had. I started small. A Bible study in my cramped Tel Aviv apartment. Just a few people at first, other young believers, some curious seekers, a couple of immigrants who'd found faith far from home. We'd sit on mismatched chairs, read scripture, pray awkwardly, and try to figure out what it meant to follow Jesus in a place where most people thought we were crazy. For a while, it was enough. But slowly, a restlessness began to grow. Not dissatisfaction, something deeper. A sense that what I was doing, as good as it was, wasn't what I was made for. Leading a Bible study in a safe apartment for people who already believed felt like playing in the shallow end when I was built for deeper water. I started praying differently. Not just "use me, Lord," but "send me. Wherever you want. However you want." I had no idea He would take me seriously. And I had no idea the answer would come with fire. It started in early 2019, during a prayer time that felt like any other. I was alone in my apartment, early morning, the kind of quiet where the city hadn't fully woken yet. I wasn't asking for anything dramatic. Just the usual: wisdom, direction, strength to keep going. Standard prayers for a young pastor trying to figure out his place in the kingdom. Then I heard it. Not audibly. Not like a voice in my ear. But clear, unmistakable, pressing into my spirit with a weight I couldn't ignore. Go south. Go to the land where my name is forbidden. I opened my eyes. Looked around. Nothing had changed. The same cramped apartment. The same worn couch. The same traffic noise filtering through the window. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Go south? To where, exactly? Lebanon? Egypt? And what did "where my name is forbidden" even mean? Plenty of places weren't exactly welcoming to the gospel. I shook it off. Went about my day. Led my Bible study that week. Tried to forget it. But the voice came back. In prayer. During worship. In the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. Always the same words, the same weight, the same quiet insistence. Go south. Go to the land where my name is forbidden. After the third time, I started researching. Not because I believed I was supposed to go, but because I needed to prove to myself how absurd the idea was. I typed variations into search engines: most restricted Christian nations, places where evangelism is illegal, dangerous countries for believers. One name kept appearing at the top of every list: Saudi Arabia. I read everything I could find. The legal system rooted in Sharia law. The absolute monarchy. The religious police. The penalties for apostasy: imprisonment, deportation, in some cases, execution. The stories of underground believers who lived in constant fear, secret churches that met in hidden rooms, expatriate Christians who worshipped in basements with covered windows and hushed voices. And the stories of those who got caught. There was the Filipino worker detained for leading a Bible study. The Ethiopian woman deported for carrying Christian materials. The Saudi national who vanished after converting to Christianity. His family never spoke of him again. Every article I read, every testimony I watched, every statistic I uncovered drove home the same message: this was insanity. Suicide. A young Israeli pastor entering Saudi Arabia to preach the gospel? I might as well walk into a lion's den with a sign that said "Eat me." But the voice didn't stop. Weeks passed. I wrestled in prayer like Jacob at the Jabbok. I argued with God, out loud, in my apartment, pacing back and forth like a madman. Why me? I'm Israeli. Do you understand what that means? If they find out who I am and what I believe, I'm dead. I'm young. I'm inexperienced. I don't speak Arabic fluently. I have no connections, no network, no protection. Silence. Then, gently, persistently. Go. One night, I found myself reading the book of Acts. Not looking for anything specific, just reading. But I stopped at chapter 9. Ananias. A disciple in Damascus. God tells him to go pray for Saul, a man known for hunting down and imprisoning Christians. Ananias's response was basically, "Lord, are you sure? This guy kills people like me." And God's response was simple: go. I read about Philip, sent to a desert road with no explanation. About Peter, called to the house of a Roman centurion when that broke every cultural rule. About Paul, sent to the Gentiles when he was the most unlikely messenger imaginable. None of them were qualified. None of them were safe. None of them had guarantees. But all of them went. I closed my Bible. Sat in the dark. And for the first time, I stopped arguing. Okay, I whispered. I'll go. Even if it costs everything. The decision didn't bring relief. It brought a new kind of fear, the kind that comes when you realize you've just said yes to something that could kill you. But it also brought clarity. I started making preparations. Quietly. Carefully. I reached out to underground contacts I'd heard about through missionary networks, people who knew people who helped believers move in and out of restricted regions. I secured false documentation. Not Israeli. Not obviously Christian. Just another foreign worker looking for construction jobs in the Gulf. I couldn't tell my family. They'd already disowned me for following Jesus. Telling them I was going to Saudi Arabia would either make them think I'd completely lost my mind or try to physically stop me. I told my Bible study group I was taking a sabbatical. Told my landlord I'd be gone for a while. Told almost no one the truth. Within 2 months, I had a contact named Danisha, a Sri Lankan expatriate who led a secret fellowship in Al-Ramal, and a plan to cross the border hidden in a cargo truck. I prayed one last time before I left. Not for safety. Not for success. Just for courage. And in early spring of 2019, I stepped into the unknown. I arrived at dawn. The cargo truck rumbled to a stop on the outskirts of Olramel, an isolated industrial town that looked like it had been assembled from dust and forgotten. I'd spent the last 6 hours hidden beneath a tarp in the truck bed, breathing through a small gap between crates, my body cramped and aching. When the driver knocked twice on the metal side, the signal, I crawled out, blinking against the pale morning light. The first thing that struck me was the silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that presses down on you, makes you aware of every breath, every footstep. Beige buildings stretched in every direction, their paint faded and cracked by relentless sun. Dust covered the roads, the cars, the few scraggly trees struggling to survive in the heat. And mosques on every corner, their minarets rising like watchful sentries over the town. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, thinking, I'm actually here. In Saudi Arabia. This is real. The driver nodded toward a figure waiting near a shuttered mechanic's shop about 50 meters away. Then he drove off without a word, leaving me standing alone on a street where I didn't belong. I walked toward the figure, trying to look casual, though everything in me screamed to run. David? The voice was quiet, cautious. I nodded. The woman in front of me was small, mid-40s, with dark eyes that had seen too much fear. She wore a simple headscarf and modest clothing that helped her blend into the background. I'm Danisha, she said, her English accented but clear. Come. We don't have much time before people start moving. She led me through a series of narrow alleys, never walking in a straight line, always checking over her shoulder. We didn't speak. Every sound, a door closing, a car engine starting, made both of us tense. Finally, we stopped in front of what looked like an abandoned paint workshop. The windows were dark, covered from the inside. The door was rusted. A faded sign in Arabic hung crooked above the entrance. Danisha unlocked it quickly and pulled me inside. The smell hit me immediately, chemicals, old paint, something acrid and permanent that had soaked into the concrete floor and walls. Rusted metal shelves lined one side, covered in dust and forgotten cans. The space was dim, lit only by slivers of light creeping through cracks in the cardboard taped over every window. But it wasn't empty. 7 people sat in a loose circle in the center of the room. They looked up as I entered, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. Danisha gestured toward them. This is our family. She introduced them quietly. 2 Filipino workers, Maria and Joseph, who cleaned hotels in the city center. An Eritrean woman named Aisha who worked as a domestic helper. A Sudanese man named Omar, a construction laborer with calloused hands and a gentle smile. And then, the 2 who made my breath catch, Rafiq and Amira. Saudi nationals. Born here. Raised Muslim. Now followers of Jesus, living every day knowing that their faith could cost them everything. We've been praying for a teacher for 3 years, Danisha said softly. We have Bibles, but we don't always understand them. We worship, but we don't know if we are doing it right. We feel alone. Her voice cracked on that last word. I looked around at their faces, exhausted, desperate, hungry. They weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for hope. How often do you meet? I asked. Twice a week, Rafiq answered, his Arabic accent thick. Sometimes more if it's safe. But never during the day. Never with lights that can be seen from outside. He pointed to a small battery-powered lamp in the center of their circle. This is all we use. I knelt down and joined the circle. The concrete was cold beneath my knees. Can we worship?" Maria asked hesitantly. "Now that you're here?" I nodded. What happened next, I will never forget. They began to sing, so quietly it was almost a whisper. A hymn I recognized, "How Great Thou Art," but in 3 different languages, their voices blending into something fragile and beautiful. Tears streamed down Aisha's face. Omar closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent prayer. Danisha gripped her worn Bible like it was the most precious thing in the world. And I realized, this was the church. Not a building. Not a program. Not a polished service with lights and sound systems. Just a group of believers, risking their lives to whisper the name of Jesus in a place where his name was forbidden. The fear in that room was palpable. But so was the joy. And in that moment, I understood why God had sent me. Not because I was qualified, but because they needed someone to tell them they weren't alone. The months that followed became a rhythm I never could have imagined, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. We never arrived at the same time. Danisha came first, always, unlocking the workshop and checking that nothing had been disturbed. Then the others would trickle in over the next hour, Maria through the back alley, Omar from the construction site still covered in dust, Rafiq taking a deliberately long route to make sure he wasn't followed. I always came last, my heart pounding every time I approached that rusted door. We communicated through coded messages. The shipment arrives at 9 meant we were meeting that night. Delivery delayed meant it wasn't safe. We never wrote anything down that could incriminate us. Scripture passages were memoized, not highlighted. Notes from my teachings were destroyed immediately after each gathering, torn into tiny pieces and flushed or burned. Every precaution felt like walking a tightrope in the dark. But somehow, in the midst of that constant vigilance, something remarkable happened. We became family. I started asking them to share their stories, not just how they came to faith, but why they stayed when the cost was so high. Danisha went first one night, her voice steady but soft. She'd grown up Buddhist in Sri Lanka, came to Saudi Arabia for work, and felt spiritually empty for years. Then a Filipino co-worker secretly gave her a Bible. She read it hidden in her room after her roommates fell asleep. When I got to the part where Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," she paused, her eyes glistening. I wept. Because I was so tired. And for the first time, someone was offering me rest, not more rules, not more rituals. Just rest. She converted alone in her room, whispering a prayer she barely understood, and spent the next 2 years worshipping in secret before she found one other believer. Then another. Then Rafiq. When she said his name, I turned to him. He was always the quietest in our group, watchful, careful, carrying the weight of a choice that could get him killed. Why? I asked him one night. Why risk everything? He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he spoke, his voice low. I was taught that God was distant. That we served him out of duty, fear, obligation. That paradise was earned by performance. He looked down at his hands. But when I read the New Testament in secret, when I read that God became flesh and died for me, not because I earned it, but because he loved me, his voice broke. How could I not follow him? Rafiq's family didn't know. If they found out, they would either turn him in or disown him. Maybe both. He lived a double life, appearing at the mosque on Fridays, praying the formal prayers, all while his heart belonged to Jesus. Some days I feel like I'm being torn in two, he admitted. But when I'm here, with you all, I remember it's worth it. Despite the fear, or maybe because of it, our love for each other deepened in ways I'd never experienced. We prayed for each other's safety. We shared what little food we had. We celebrated small victories, Aisha memorizing the book of Philippians, Omar leading his roommate to Christ, Maria sneaking Bibles into the hotel where she worked. But there were also close calls. One night, a police car parked outside the workshop for 20 minutes. We sat frozen in total darkness, not even breathing loudly, praying silent, desperate prayers. When it finally drove away, Danisha collapsed against the wall, shaking. Another time, Omar arrived with a bruised face. Security had stopped him on the street, demanded to see his phone. He'd deleted all his Bible apps and Christian contacts just days before. If they'd stopped him any earlier, we would have all been exposed. God protected me, he whispered. I know he did. And slowly, against all logic, we started to believe it. Not that we were invincible, we weren't naive. But that maybe, just maybe, God had called us to this place and wouldn't abandon us here. I felt it too. Fear was my constant companion. Every sound outside made my heart race, every car slowing near the workshop made my palms sweat. But alongside the fear was something I can only describe as supernatural peace. A quiet assurance that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We grew bolder. Not reckless, but bolder. Our prayers shifted from God, keep us hidden, to God, let your name be glorified, even here. We started studying the book of Acts, reading about the apostles who refused to stop preaching even when threatened, beaten, imprisoned. They were just like us, Maria said one night, wonder in her voice. Scared. Ordinary. But they didn't stop. Neither will we, Rafik said quietly. We had no idea how soon those words would be tested. Or that the test would come with fire. It was a Friday night, just past midnight, when our world collapsed. 12 of us sat in our usual circle on the concrete floor of the workshop, the largest gathering we'd had in weeks. The battery-powered lamp cast long shadows across our faces as I read aloud from Acts chapter 4, where the apostles prayed for boldness under persecution. Now, Lord, consider their threats and enable your servants to speak your word with great boldness. The words felt heavy that night. Prophetic, almost. Like we were reading our own story before it happened. I was about to continue to the next verse when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not footsteps. Not a car engine. Something sharper. Metallic. Repeated in quick succession. Click. 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 Camera shutters. My blood went cold. I lifted my hand to signal silence, my mouth opening to warn them, but I never got the chance. The workshop door exploded inward with a deafening crash, wood splintering, metal hinges tearing from the frame. 4 men stormed through the opening, their faces hard and twisted with rage, eyes burning with the kind of zealous fury that doesn't ask questions. Chaos erupted instantly. One of them grabbed Danisha by the collar and yanked her backward. She cried out, her Bible falling from her hands and skidding across the floor. Another man kicked our lamp, sending it flying into the corner where it shattered. Darkness swallowed the room, except for thin slivers of moonlight cutting through cracks in the cardboard-covered windows. My heart hammered in my chest. One of the men rushed directly at me, shouting in Arabic, his voice sharp and cutting. You are the foreign preacher. The corrupter. Behind him, another man held a metal fuel canister, the kind used for generators. The third carried a thick electric cable coiled around his arm like a weapon. I raised my hands instinctively, trying to calm them, trying to speak, but 2 of them grabbed me by the arms and dragged me roughly into the center of the room. My knees scraped against the concrete. Around me, my friends cried out, some praying in desperate whispers, others trembling, frozen in terror. Maria sobbed. Aisha covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with horror. The leader, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes, spat on the floor near my feet. He pointed at me, his hand shaking with anger. "You preach forbidden lies in our land," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You poison minds with your false god. Tonight, you burn." Before I could respond, I felt it, the cold, shocking splash of liquid pouring over my head. It soaked through my hair, ran down my face, drenched my shirt and back. The smell hit me immediately, sharp and suffocating. Gasoline. My body went numb. My mind struggled to process what was happening. This is real. This is actually happening. Behind me, Rafiq's voice broke through the chaos, strong, defiant, desperate. "Don't touch him. He's done nothing wrong. We've done nothing wrong." One of the men turned and drove his fist into Rafiq's ribs with brutal force. I heard the sickening crack, heard Rafiq gasp and crumple to the floor, clutching his side. "Rafiq!" Danisha screamed. Someone kicked my legs out from under me. I collapsed hard onto my knees, gasoline dripping from my chin onto the concrete, the fumes making my eyes water. The leader crouched down in front of me, his face inches from mine. "Any last words, preacher?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. In my mind, only one thought surfaced, clear and terrible. Is this really how it ends? I expected terror to rise, expected it to claw its way up my throat and choke me. Expected my mind to spiral into panic, to beg, to plead for my life. But instead, nothing. No fear. No panic. Just a quiet, steady voice in my spirit, calm, unmistakable, closer than my own heartbeat. "Do not fear the fire. I am here." The words wrapped around me like arms. Solid. Unshakable. I lifted my head and looked at the leader. He was pulling a matchbook from his pocket, his hand steady, his expression devoid of mercy. Around me, my friends were weeping. Praying. Whispering the name of Jesus like a lifeline. The leader struck a match. It flared orange in the darkness, a small tongue of flame dancing at the end of the stick. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I could hear everything, the crackle of the match, Maria's sobs, the rasping breaths of the men standing over me, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The leader looked me in the eyes one last time. Then he dropped the match. And the world exploded into fire. The world exploded orange. Flames erupted around me like living creatures, sharp, roaring, violent. They raced up my arms, across my chest, consumed the gasoline-soaked fabric of my shirt. Heat blasted outward in waves, so intense the attackers staggered backward, shielding their faces with their arms. My friends screamed. Danisha's voice, high and broken. Maria sobbing uncontrollably. Omar shouting my name like he could pull me back from the edge of death. The fire roared, a sound like a beast unleashed, crackling and snapping as it devoured everything in its path. The concrete floor around me ignited where the gasoline had pooled. Smoke filled the workshop, thick and acrid. I should have been screaming too. I should have been thrashing, rolling, trying desperately to extinguish the flames consuming my body. But I wasn't. Because something impossible was happening. The flames surrounded me, I could see them, hear them, feel the heat radiating outward, but they weren't burning me. There was no searing pain. No skin blistering. No agony tearing through my nerves. It was like standing inside a furnace made of light, not heat. I looked down at my hands, watched the fire dance across my palms, lick up my forearms, but beneath the flames, my skin remained untouched. My shirt charred and blackened. The edges of my hair singed. But my flesh, my actual flesh, felt nothing. And then I felt it. A presence. Not beside me. Not hovering above. Inside the fire with me. Strong. Gentle. Overwhelming. Like being wrapped in arms I couldn't see but could feel more clearly than anything I'd ever experienced. The chaos around me, the screams, the smoke, the terror, all of it faded into the background. I wasn't alone in the flames. He was there. I heard a gasp, sharp, disbelieving. One of the attackers, the one who'd held the cable, stumbled backward, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. "Why isn't he burning?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. Another man stepped closer, squinting through the smoke and flames, his face twisted in confusion and horror. "He should be ashes by now," he said, his voice shaking. "He should be dead." But I wasn't. The flames continued to roar, continued to swirl around me like a living wall, but they curved away from my skin as if held back by an invisible barrier. My clothes were destroyed, fabric blackened and falling away in pieces, but underneath, my skin was untouched. Whole. Unburned. Then everything shifted. The youngest of the attackers, a man who couldn't have been more than 25, fell backward, scrambling away from me like he'd seen a ghost. His hands shook violently as he pointed at me, his face drained of color. "This is a sign." He stammered, his voice thick with terror. "This is a sign, this is a sign." He kept repeating it, over and over, like his mind couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing. The leader stood frozen, his matchbook still in his hand, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. The fury that had twisted his face moments ago was gone, replaced by something I never expected to see. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. His matchbook slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. "Who protects you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "What power is this? Which jinn shields you from fire?" The fire still raged around me, flames licking at the air, but I felt calm. Anchored. Held. I looked straight into the leader's eyes and spoke the only name that mattered, the only name that had ever mattered. Jesus. The word left my lips, and the air itself seemed to shudder. The flames immediately shrank. Receded. Pulled back like they were being inhaled by an invisible force. The roar died to a whisper, then to nothing. In seconds, the fire that had consumed me, that should have killed me, extinguished completely in an unnatural, sweeping motion, as if someone had reached down and snuffed it out with their hand. The workshop fell silent. No crackling flames. No screams. No movement. Just smoke hanging in the air and the stunned, shallow breathing of 12 terrified people. The men who had come to kill me stood frozen, staring. Their eyes moved from the burned remnants of my clothing to my face, to my arms, to the floor around me where the fire had raged moments before. I was covered in soot. My shirt was destroyed, hanging in charred strips. My hair was singed at the edges. But my skin was untouched. No burns. No blisters. No redness. Not a single mark. The leader's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in front of me, his face collapsing, his hands trembling as he raised them toward me, not in violence this time, but in something that looked like desperation. What have I done?" he whispered, his voice breaking. And in that moment, the man who had come to destroy me began to weep. The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy and fragile, like the moment after a storm when you're not sure if it's truly over. I knelt on the concrete floor, surrounded by smoke and ash, my body covered in soot, my clothes destroyed. But my skin, impossibly, miraculously, untouched. The leader remained on his knees in front of me, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The other 3 men stood frozen, their weapons forgotten, their expressions a mixture of terror and awe. Behind me, Danisha wept openly, her hands covering her mouth. Rafik, still clutching his bruised ribs, whispered prayers in Arabic, broken, breathless prayers of gratitude and disbelief. Maria and Aisha clung to each other. Omar stared at me like he was trying to convince himself I was real. The leader finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen, his voice cracking as he spoke. "What must I do to be forgiven?" The question hung in the air, raw, desperate, sincere. I reached out, my hand still blackened with soot, and placed it on his shoulder. He flinched at first, then stilled. "Jesus forgives even those who come with fire," I said softly. "He died for you. Even for this. Even for tonight." His face crumpled. The man beside him, the youngest, the one who had first fallen backward, dropped to his knees as well, his voice barely a whisper. "I saw it. I saw him protect you. How can I deny what I saw?" One by one, all 4 men knelt. And there, in the same room where they had tried to execute me, surrounded by the smell of smoke and gasoline, 4 hearts turned toward Jesus. I led them through a simple prayer, the same prayer I'd prayed years ago in Tel Aviv when a street evangelist told me God knew my name. They repeated the words haltingly, some with tears streaming down their faces, others with voices so quiet I could barely hear them. When we finished, no one moved. No one knew what to say. The leader, his name was colored, I would learn later, looked around at the faces of my friends, the people he had terrorized moments before. "I have done terrible things," he said, his voice thick with shame. "Not just tonight. Before tonight. I have hurt believers. Reported them. I thought I was serving God, but I was." His voice broke. Danisha wiped her tears and spoke gently, "If God can forgive you, we can too." The immediate aftermath was a blur of shock and confusion. The new believers, still processing what had just happened, asked question after question. "What do we do now? Where do we go? Can we stay here?" I shook my head, the adrenaline finally beginning to drain from my body. "No," I said firmly. "This miracle will have consequences. By morning, people will be asking questions. Rumors will spread. This place isn't safe anymore." Rafik, still wincing from his injury, nodded in agreement. "He's right. We need to scatter. Tonight." We made a plan quickly. The group would split up, some returning to their homes, others staying with trusted friends. We would stop meeting for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Communication would be minimal, coded, cautious. Colored and the other 3 men would leave separately, returning to their lives but staying in contact through encrypted messages. "We will protect you," Colored said to me, his voice steady now. "If anyone asks, we will say we found nothing here. An empty building. A false report." But we all knew the truth, rumors were already escaping into the night. And we were right. Within days, whispers spread across Al-Ram like wildfire. A foreign preacher survived fire. A sorcerer walks among us, performing dark magic. A false prophet is deceiving the people. The stories twisted and grew with each retelling. Some said I was a jinn in human form. Others claimed I had made a pact with demons. The secret police began asking questions, showing photos, searching neighborhoods. Danisha sent me a coded message: "The shipment is compromised. Leave immediately." I had no choice. Within 48 hours, I was in the back of a fish delivery van, hidden beneath tarps and crates of ice, breathing through a small crack as we rumbled toward the Jordanian border. The smell of fish was overwhelming. My body ached from being cramped in the same position for hours. But I was alive. The underground network of Christian drivers moved me from vehicle to vehicle, safe house to safe house, until finally, I crossed the border under cover of darkness. I looked back once, toward the land where I had nearly died, where I had seen God move in ways I still couldn't fully comprehend. And I prayed for the church I was leaving behind. For Danisha. For Rafiq. For Khalid and the others who had just begun their journey. I didn't know if I would ever see them again. I didn't know if any of them would survive. All I knew was that the fire I had feared, the fire that should have killed me, had become the fire that set others free. 4 years. 4 years of exile. 4 years of silence. 4 years of wondering if any of them had survived. I settled in Jordan, working odd jobs, leading a small Bible study for refugees, trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But every night, I prayed for them. For Danisha. For Rafiq. For Khalid and the others who had knelt in that smoke-filled workshop. I had no way to contact them. No way to know if they were still free, still alive, still following Jesus. The not knowing was its own kind of fire, slow-burning, relentless. Some days, doubt crept in. Was it worth it? I would ask myself in the dark. Did I accomplish anything, or did I just put people in danger and then abandon them? I wrestled with guilt, with questions that had no easy answers, with the haunting possibility that my obedience had cost them everything. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an unknown number. Almost deleted it. Almost ignored it as spam. But something made me open it. A voice recording. Just 40 seconds long. I pressed play. The voice that came through was hesitant, accented, but unmistakable. "David, this is Yasir. You knew me as Khalid. I have a new name now. A new life. The church is alive. It has grown in ways you cannot imagine. You must come back. You must see what Jesus built through your fire." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I played it again. And again. The church is alive. Within 2 weeks, I was back. The journey was even more dangerous this time: secret routes, false documents, trusted contacts who moved me through networks I didn't fully understand. But I didn't care about the risk. I had to see for myself. Yasir met me at dawn on the outskirts of a different town, his face older but his eyes brighter than I remembered. "Come," he said simply. "They are waiting." He led me through narrow streets to what looked like an ordinary electrician's shop. We entered through a back door, descended a steep staircase, and emerged into a hidden room beneath the building. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. More than 50 people filled the space, sitting on the floor, leaning against walls, crowded together in the dim light. Filipinos. Saudis. Eritreans. Indians. Pakistanis. Faces from a dozen different nations, languages, backgrounds. And they were worshipping. Softly, carefully, but unmistakably, they were singing. The same hymn we had sung that first night in the paint workshop. how great thou art. In multiple languages, their voices blending into something achingly beautiful. Tears blurred my vision. Yasir placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Wait." The song ended. The room fell quiet. Then Yasir walked to the front, holding something in his hands, a Bible, worn and stained, with soot still marking its edges. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "belonged to Danisha. She gave it to me the night everything changed." He paused, his eyes finding mine in the back of the room. "And tonight, the man whose fire brought me to Jesus has returned." 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Yasir continued, his voice thick with emotion, "The night you didn't burn, that was the night I was set free. I came to destroy. But Jesus used fire to save me." He gestured around the room. Half the people here came to faith because of what happened that night. Some heard the story and couldn't deny it. Others met one of us and saw something different. The fire spread, but not the way I intended. It spread as light. I walked forward, my legs unsteady, and embraced him. We both wept, this man who had tried to kill me, now my brother. The rest of that night was a blur of faces and stories. Danisha was there, still leading with quiet strength. Rafiq, whose ribs had healed but whose boldness had only grown. Maria, who had led 3 other hotel workers to Christ. Omar, who now discipled a group of construction laborers. And so many others I had never met, new believers, second-generation disciples, a church multiplying in the shadows. I stood at the front of that hidden room, surrounded by faces that represented nations that should be enemies, and led them in worship. We sang. We prayed. We broke bread together. And I finally understood. The fire I had feared, the fire that should have consumed me, had become the fire God used to ignite a church. Not a building. Not an institution. A living, breathing, multiplying family of believers who risked everything to follow Jesus in the darkest places. As I looked around that room one last time before leaving again, I thought about the furnace in Daniel. About the 3 Hebrew boys who walked into flames and came out untouched. About how the king looked into the fire and saw not 3 figures, but 4. God doesn't always spare us from the fire. But He always walks through it with us. And sometimes, miraculously, mysteriously, He uses the very flames meant to destroy us to set others free. Some fires destroy. But the fire of God's presence? That fire only purifies, protects, and spreads. And once it's ignited, nothing can put it out.